in the matter. Trudy, my sister, got stuck in the lavatory. She was there all day on Saturday. Nobody knew she was there.
Sisters Trudy, Sharon, Charlotte, Shelley, and Brother Leroy sincerely thank you for coming today to remember John with us. Since May 31st, we are painfully aware that we are only 5 siblings instead of 6. He left a wide space, and we are missing him.
As the oldest member of the Ted and Evelyn Sloan family, and being almost 11 years old at the time, I well remember the 19th of January, 1949, when our dad returned from the hospital with the news we'd been waiting for. The baby was a boy, weighed in at 10 pounds 6 ounces, and our family was spending the winter of 1948 and 49 in Campbell River, BC. Now, my baby brother's arrival was met with a great rejoicing by the BC clan living close by. Although many of you know him only as John Sloan, some of you may be surprised to learn that his birth certificate states his name as Elmer Leslie William Sloan. Elmer, for Mum's brother who was lost in World War II, and lies in a cemetery in Holland. Leslie and William were for the 2 grandfathers. Many years later, our sister Charlotte was responsible for the nickname John. In early May, we returned to Saskatchewan with our potential little farmer. 18 months later, Brother Leroy joined our family, and since it was summer holidays, and I was now 12 years old, I could care for little Elmer while Mum was in the hospital. Now, my dad had not only chores and the farm work to do, but was also frantically building an extension onto our home to accommodate his rapidly expanding family. Now, the day finally came when Mum was allowed to come home. Now, she could hardly wait to cuddle little Elmer again. She eagerly extended her arms, saying, "Come to Mama," to the little guy who was sticking close to me. He replied, "Mama," and indicated towards me. The real Mama was on the verge of tears. Never to be outwitted, she reached into her bag and brought out a banana, holding it out to little Elmer. But he, like his Mama, was not to be outwitted either. He cautiously edged up to her, grabbed the banana out of her hand, and hurried back to his big sister. It was a very sad Mama that night. However, by the next morning, he'd figured out who the real Mama was, and happiness reigned in our home once again. However, the banana story has lived on for 73 years. One other story that stands out in my memory of Elmer's preschool years is the day 2 young men came to call. One of them I married several years later. The other was driving his dad's new, shiny black Oldsmobile. Now, as was always the case at our home, guests had to come in for coffee and a bite to eat. Now, it had been wash day at our house that morning, and Mum and I were secretly pleased that we had managed to have finished the job, even throwing out the wash water, before they'd arrived. Time for the guests to leave, and in true Saskatchewan style, we escorted them to the vehicle in the yard. But what do our wondering eyes should appear but 2 little boys just finished up the job of giving that black Oldsmobile a car wash, using the recycled muddy wash water. The Oldsmobile wasn't shiny anymore. Now the muted gray color with the pattern of muddy swirls. Now, they were only 4 or 5 years old at the time, but already were showing signs of having a good work ethic, which time has proven to be very true for both of these boys. I truly believe they thought they were helping. Now, this quality that was so obvious in John's later life, helpful and generous with his time, his finances, and whatever he had that he thought might please or help someone, especially if it was a person in a rough situation or needed encouragement. We sisters all remember times when he came to our aid in various ways, including many building projects. But his assistance wasn't only for family. He also helped friends and neighbors, community groups, and others who were struggling. A few years ago, John arrived at my door looking very dapper, with a cane in his hand. I guess I must have had an incredulous look on my face, so he asked as he held up the cane, "You know what this is, don't you?" To which I replied, "No, I don't." And he said, "It was great-grandfather Joel's cane that I got in the divvy." Now, the divvy being when we divided Mum's belongings after her death. Why was he giving it to me? His answer was, "We are only the stewards of items like this, to look after them for a time." He was not one to hold on to possessions too tightly, but wisely shared the joy and the privilege of stewardship with others. Last week, I had a letter of condolence from a granddaughter in Scotland who said, "I have great memories of visiting Uncle John on his farm and feeding the baby cows, and even one time a baby deer. I have an arrowhead that he gifted me on display in my room." I knew he had given me a present for her convocation, but I didn't know what it contained until now. He just said, "I always liked that kid," with not a lot of fanfare. I guess I could have asked him, but he quickly changed the subject. That was John's way. When John was in hospice, we tried to send emails and texts to encourage him. A poem I sent to him was titled "The Love of Old Things," and I said to him, "You and I share a fondness for old things, as one can see by the homes we choose and the decorative features in them." John's last earthly residence was at T. Eaton House. I also mentioned the fence beside his house in Wilkie. That was the one-man museum. Attached to that fence were metal seats from farm implements, tools, and household items from long ago. Everything was painted or restored to make a very interesting and educational display. In 2022, he bought an old car. He got it running, put a coat of paint on it, and gave his summer visitors rides around the town of Wilkie, drawing attention by honking his horn. It was a first-rate entertainment for all of us. Now we're left with great memories of a kind-hearted, generous, and fun-loving brother who found the courage to turn his life around with God's help. We look forward to meeting him again.
At a time like this, my mind wanders back to good and pivotal events in the past. For example, Trudy coming home on a Friday night and the excitement that ignited in the small farmhouse. Sharon making corn fritters out in the bush on the playhouse stove. Chuck learning to walk after a year in bed, all of us cheering her on, and Grandpa coming in to take in the show. Shelley getting her first bike, then her horse, and the joy we all felt with her. And today I recall memories of my brother. We were a year and a half apart in age, so spent hours and hours playing cowboy games. I was Pete, he was Lenny, riding make-believe horses and providing the movie script for each other. So many hours playing catch, playing made-up games. One summer we built a Sherwood forest in the bush south of the house. We built huts made of branches, set colored birds in the trees from our Christmas target game. Mom was impressed when she found our signage and she let us know. It's a good idea, John. John got the idea we should dig a well out by the clothesline square. We started with a tobacco can and dug deep enough to need someone down the hole, that's John, and another at the top, that's me, to pull up the full bucket and dump it. John figured we needed a fence post over the hole so the rope was tied to it and let down to the digger. It also provided a mean for that digger to get out of the hole. Well, at 7 feet, we hit water. And unfortunately, Grandpa Billy figured it might cave in on the digger, so we lost our well. Dennis started dating Trudy again, and John found an old picture of her and offered to sell it to Dennis. When the price was revealed, Dennis didn't think he wanted to buy it. John started in on the line, "So you don't even care for her that much." It almost worked. In high school, we played football against St. Thomas Collegiate. Very late in the game, we were behind by more than a touchdown, but we scored one. With seconds left, we kicked off, and John went after that ball like a madman possessed. It was flag football, so if you pulled the flag, the game was over. But instead, he used the better attack and punched the ball free out of the arms of the opposing player, and the scramble was on. On the last play of the game, we scored yet another to win. Dad told us if you get in a scrap and the other guy is getting a meal, make sure you get a lunch. Well, one day John got all of that and more. With a move like Custard's Last Stand, he saved his hair, ended the lunch stealing, and a lot of bullying. When John was in grade 12, one boy was bullying another, trying to pick a fight. And John approached the point of engagement and said, "Break it up or I'm taking on the winner." That saved face for the one boy and shut down the bullying attempt. Nicely done. Bible quizzing during the high school years had many moments, days, and events. Charlotte, John, and I comprised our family team, and as a result, we had international trips, wins, so many family nights practicing after milking, and so many neat teenagers whom we met. And it was a terrific bonding experience for the three of us. On a summer night, the folks were away visiting. John was of a mind that he and I could milk all 13 cows. The old car rattled in the lane just as the last of the milk was draining out of the separator bowl. The excitement at the time was great for all, but the best was Mom praising us up in the store later when we were within earshot. "Every farm needs 2 good teenage boys and a good dog," she said, and then lit into the explanation. John decided to buy a car. Uncle Lou had one for cheap, $20 cheap, and it was exciting for John to have wheels. He was generous, providing transportation as well. He was going a bit fast on the South Road on the way home from church, and he had a mishaps. I made out that I was real hurt, and he was concerned, which was the desired result. After all those wrestling matches, he really did care. He transported the 4 of us teenage siblings to Boysdale Camp near Edmonton. Well, this was a major adventure given his age and his newfound ability to provide transportation. He and I each had a dorm of little campers to look after. In the night, I went to check on some noise in John's cabin. One of the little boys had wet the bed and was shivering like mad. John got him out of the soup, into dry shorts, and into his own dry bed. And of course, John had to find a girl while we were there as well. Thanks for the memories, John. Love, from Leroy.
Now, John lived in an era when a kid with a dog or a horse or a gun could roam the pastures and the bushes alone and at will. It was an era when learning to work began early, with carrying fuel from the woodpile, snow for melting, or pails of water from the well. A time when milking cows and slopping hogs were truly for the common good. And it was an era untouched by the specter of conscription, to go to war as his uncles had faced a decade before his birth. Now, along with work and wandering outdoors, music was the therapy of the times for whatever ailed young people then. One of John's later precious gifts to me was an old cowbell from the farm, symbolic of so much we had both experienced in the pastures and the barnyard, but had left behind. Now, as a big sister, I remember the 2 new long-sleeved t-shirts from the catalog for John's first days at Keystone School, and cops and robbers games with our younger kids and the Bodwine boys, and leaving home for good at 16 when John was 11. 5 years later, we moved far away, and letters from John as a teenager were among those that kept us connected. Our subsequent lives as adults put us in close proximity once again. When John moved back from BC, where he had gone after high school, he lived with us in North Battleford for several months. And when I took some substitute teaching days, John took care of 3-year-old Kent. It was practice for later on. Later, after being transferred to various other places, we returned and lived within the blocks of each other. Now, when John built his own house, while still in his 20s, Bob returned from a family shingling bee with an incredulous, "He's got more guts than a fat old cow." Now, Curtis and Devon were on either side of Aaron's age, and especially during John's single dad days, they spent considerable time at our house. All of it was for mutual benefit. Now, after Connie joined our family, and they moved to the farm, they were always part of our frequent gatherings, whether there, at the villa, or at our house. John is fondly remembered by my older grandsons for generous tooth payoffs. From the farm gatherings, the grandchildren, they remember the animals, the sand pile, and the rides on various contraptions. Now, through the years, the sorrows and the joys of our lives were linked. It is noteworthy that John's strong belief in the therapeutic power of music extended, years later, to one of my younger grandsons. John lent him a guitar and an amp to get started because he believed in him. As we Saskatchewan sisters shared our last meal with John and Wilkie, we prayed together, and each of us well knowing it was probably our last goodbye. It was a quiet and a deep taking leave of one another. undergirded by a long-standing love between us, and of a sure and certain hope that lies ahead.
Little sisters usually admire their big brothers, and I'm no exception. Since my earliest years, John was my champion and my protector. As we grew older, I admired the person he had become and the values he embraced.
Now, John saw the value and the potential in the people others dismissed or ignored. He cheered for the underdog, not the favorite. He never sang better than when he played for Charlotte's girls Angie and Carrie, or the residents in a nursing home, or his Johnny Cash fan from the group home. He treated each of them as an equal and didn't sing down to them. His music was not for honorariums or for applause, but it was his gift to people he cared about.
John supported those struggling with addictions, believing in who they could be and encouraging them to believe it too. For some far away, John sent an email a day. For some, he became a sponsor. For others, John rolled up his sleeves and helped in practical ways to help pull them back up on their feet. He saw through the cons and the excuses, but he also clearly saw the hurt and the need. John was quiet about those he helped. He respected their privacy. He was an AA roundup speaker, sharing his story, not because it was easy to do, but because it might make a difference to someone else in a hard place.
John showed great compassion for single mothers, those who are often judged harshly for mistakes they didn't make by themselves. John was quick to reach into his pocket, a one-time gift, a monthly check, a baby calf, or just kindness and a vote of confidence. When John visited me at my store, a girl came in, obviously almost ready to have her baby. After she left, John asked me about her. I confirmed she was on her own. Without hesitation, John pulled out a $100 bill and said, "Would you give that to her for me? Tell her to get something she'll need for the baby." His generosity was never publicized, but I happen to personally know some of the recipients, including a little girl whose mom died of an overdose.
John saw value in things that others discarded or ignored. Even as a teenager, he had a keen interest in the past. John knew who homesteaded on each quarter section and how the farm implements from long ago worked. He found artifacts in abandoned junk piles that told a story of the folks who had once lived there. John's interest went further back than the early settlers, as he walked up and down the sandy roads around our farm, watching for arrowheads, axes, and tomahawks, reminiscent of another group of people who had either lived or passed through our land. He collected antiques long before they were considered to be of value.
Later in life, John saw the hidden beauty and the value in old houses and met the challenge of restoring them. In North Battleford, John and Connie did an amazing job of bringing an old 3-story mansion on 98th Street back to life, filling it with the beautiful antiques John had collected.
In his sobriety, John wanted to give back to the world around him. As a member of the school board, he brought a wealth of knowledge from the perspective of a teacher, a vice principal, a parent, and a taxpayer. He genuinely cared about the quality of education that our Saskatchewan kids received, including the First Nations kids in the Sagaweo School in North Battleford.
John was a good neighbor. He often helped others in the prairie pioneer way he was raised on. On the farm in Maymont, John did chores for those who were sick or had to be away, and helped others in times of sadness and loss. John wrote many eulogies. He had a gift with words that painted the loved ones with grace and humor and made you feel like you knew them better. When tragedy struck a family and the neighbors gathered with combines and trucks to take off the crop, John and Connie had no machinery to contribute. They headed to the chicken house and to the garden and helped cook meals for those in the field.
John pitched into the community. Back in the 90s, our hometown of Maymont desperately needed a community center. It was seemingly impossible undertaking for such a small town, but a variety of fundraisers were organized. John joined a group of creative, hardworking farmers and mechanics who raised funds by restoring antique tractors. 5 years later, this courageous little community had raised $750,000, and their dream had become a reality.
John looked out for others. One winter day, when he was working at Deschamps, a car drove in from the direction of Saskatchewan, sputtered and died beside the garage. Now the needed parts would arrive by bus the next day. 3 ladies from Turtleford had no idea what to do for the night. There was no hotel at the time, and not even a place to buy a meal. John made a quick phone call and then drove them to my mom's house. Those ladies never forgot John's kindness or my mom's hospitality.
The only decidedly unneighborly thing John did was to steal Swain's horses. On his way to work at McNaughton's one morning, John spied a little bay mare in her foal at least 2 miles from home. Cursing his bad luck, John postponed his work, caught the mare, and with only a rope in place of a bridle, managed to ride her home. It was an unpleasant ride, as the mare was resistant to leaving where she was and did not handle quite like she usually did. Several sweaty miles later, imagine John's surprise as he turned into his own lane and was greeted with neighs of welcome from the very horse he thought he was riding, with her foal right beside her. It was with great embarrassment that John had to return the pair he had stolen.
John's sense of humor. Now, during their years on the farm, Connie, the soft-hearted animal lover, acquired an orphaned baby coyote. She named it Shadow, and it became a fixture on the farm. One morning, a visitor stopped in for coffee, and as they sat at the kitchen table, the guest's eyes widened and he hissed, "John, there's a coyote right up by the house. Look, it's a coyote." John quickly replied, "Shh, don't say that so loud. Connie and I don't have enough money, so we can't buy the kids a dog. If no one tells them, they wouldn't know the difference. Let's keep it our secret."
We have shared random memories and reflections, but find ourselves unable to provide a concise timeline. John's careers, interests, and friendships were intermingled, and he was well known in many overlapping circles. No matter the date or the era, people were front and center for John. A direct quote from his book, "When all is said and done, it's people and how we treat each other that really matters." I was 2 years old when I met John. As the years passed by, I found in him a special friend to whom I could go with my troubles, or for advice, or just for a good visit. Ours was a lasting mutual friendship that I call a treasure without measure. Of all of us, he wrote, hard to have asked for a better bunch of siblings, each so different, but each so important in making our family complete. Interaction with people was John's trademark, whether as a farmer, teacher, handyman, carpenter, musician, songwriter, friend, son, dad, or grandpa. Above all the people and the pieces in his life, John would be quick to say of his boys, Curtis and Devon are the best part of him. He married Marilyn Hollowell in 1969. Kurt was born in 1975 and Devon in 77. They and their families are cherished members of the Sloan clan. He was proud that they are the two that are carrying on the Sloan name. Of his grandkids, we all agree they were so dear to his heart. Here are John's written words about his wife Connie. Miracles were not something I had any faith in, and indeed I didn't recognize one when it was right in front of me. Yeah, the miracle's name was Connie. I had no idea how that young lady would influence and change my life forever. She was the sweetest, most tenacious, stubborn person who had ever come into my life, and she lived to see the day when we walked hand in hand, laughing in the sunshine. A niece who loved both John and Connie summarized their journey together. Connie stood with John in his fight against alcohol, and John stood with Connie in her fight against cancer. Students remember his unique teaching methods. Yes, a batch of kittens was born under a girl's desk, and chicks were incubated. Canoeing, fishing, and campfires were all in Mr. Sloan's curriculum. John met Thelma in the fall of 2009. The magic of music has always drawn people together, and so it is not surprising that music triggered Thelma and John's interest in each other. Since that time, they have gone on to make music together and to share their gift with countless others. For the past several years, John left a guitar in my house, so it was handy when he came to visit. In reply to my question about his personal faith journey, he said, "My ideas and thoughts are different than some, but we end up at the same place, a belief that Jesus Christ is our Savior. We each have our defects and our talents, but the fact is, none of that matters. Salvation is a gift freely given to those who could never deserve it on our own merit." Our cousin, Earl Sloan, introduced a special song to us a few years ago. John often sang it, and we have asked Earl to sing it today because it is an appropriate ending to John's story.